So thank you everybody for welcoming me into the fine art world. It has been a quick and novel journey for me, as you'll see through this presentation. But everybody has been so welcoming and so nice, and this is just a world I didn't even know existed. And it's like going to Mars and finding it a very friendly and wonderful place. Today I would like to cover a range of topics which might seem a little bit off topic of the topic of art, but they have everything to do with my development and how I landed in this world. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history of the Nebraska sandhills because most people don't know about them, a little bit about my own personal background, about the two ranches I've lived on in my life, Pine Creek Ranch and the JHL Ranch where I live now. And then I will show you kind of my progression of drawing because I am entirely self-taught, and so you'll get to see all of my very novel development from childhood all the way to now. It's kind of an interesting journey for me because I've never really compiled that before. You can see what I was working on in college and then how I transitioned into fine art. See some of my current work that I'm doing and my upcoming shows. I'd like to start out with pointing out the difference between Tucson and Nebraska because nobody knows where I live. So here, I have a little pointer over here on the left. This is, well, now even I can't see. That's Phoenix there, so that's Tucson down there. And I live up there. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of distance perspective. It's 1,100 miles. So this is the state of Nebraska, and I'd like to, oops, here we go, show you the two ranches that I've lived on. So this is the ranch I grew up on, an original family homestead. And then this is the ranch that I live on now, not very far apart. And then over here is Omaha, Nebraska. So that is where I went to college. So Nebraska was established as a state in 1867, only 2 years after the Civil War. And my great-great-grandfather, whose name was Old Jules Sandoz, came from Switzerland in 1885. And he took the train about as far as it would go at that time, and he got off in Nebraska. He believed that anywhere sunflowers would grow, corn would grow, which, coming from the Nebraska sandhills, that is not accurate. Sand, when it's disturbed, will grow sunflowers, and it will grow nothing else when it is disturbed and that top layer is broken. So he tried to make a go of farming in Nebraska in the sandhills, which is a difficult situation. So on the right is my great-great-aunt, Mari Sandoz, who is a well-known author. She documented the Native American tribes in our area at the time, and she wrote a book about my great-great-grandfather, Old Jules. And it talks about who he was as a person. And he was an irascible, unpleasant individual. Irascible is an appropriate term for him. But he was incredibly smart and incredibly far-seeing. And he could see the value of the Nebraska sandhills. And he was one of the very influential people in settling the sandhills and bringing in settlers from Switzerland and Germany. And many of my neighbors today are families that he brought over 5 generations ago. In fact, he fell down a well at his original homestead. He fell 60 feet and broke his leg and ended up being worked on by Dr. Walter Reed, who was working at Fort Robinson at the time. There's an infamous quote that he said. It may or may not be true, but apparently he woke up during surgery and yelled at Walter Reed, "You try to take my leg off, and I will shoot you so fast you will smell before you hit the floor." Maybe he said that, maybe he didn't, but it's a good quote anyway. Mari Sandoz was a really unique woman in that she lived among the native tribes, which was something that women, almost nobody was doing, male or female, in the late 1800s. So she actually documented herself stories that were told to her by the tribes members on Fort Robinson and even in some of their camps. She wrote 19 books about Native Americans and influenced me greatly. This is a picture of the Nebraska sandhills. Most people do not know what they look like. They are the world's largest grass-stabilized sand dunes. They're basically the Sahara Desert covered with a small crust of grass. which makes them an ideal home for cattle, originally for bison, but for cattle now, and not ideal for farming, because if the soil is disturbed, then it doesn't produce very well. It is a semi-arid desert. It ranges in temperature from -30 to 105 degrees. And because it is a desert, that can range, I mean, you live in a desert, so you know what that is like every day. It gets about 20 inches of rain per year, so maybe twice what you get here, I think. But it sits over the top of the Ogallala Aquifer, which is the largest freshwater aquifer in the world. So at the bottom of every one of these east to west running sand dunes is basically an oasis. Usually hay meadows are what we use them for. And it was actually thought to be uninhabitable until the late 1870s. Laura Ingalls Wilder even wrote about it and said no one will ever live in this great American wasteland, which was not true because it had been the home of the Lakota and the Cheyenne tribes, Pawnee, but American settlers did not want to live there because it was not good for farming, and the original Homesteading Act didn't allow for enough ground to run cattle at the time. I live in Cherry County, which is one of the largest counties in the whole country, and it is home to 5,500 people. It's 6,000 square miles, and it has 190,000 cattle. So there's plenty of space if you don't mind sharing with cows. This is my family. I was born in 1993 to Jules and Lynette Ostrander. My dad lived on the family ranch his whole life, but he had been a Baptist minister for a time and worked in Chicago. And he met my mother there, who was a registered nurse. But by the time I came around, we had moved back to the family ranch. So I have lived on the ranch my whole life. There's a little arrow pointing to me sitting on my brother's lap. All of us were homeschooled because we were so rural that there was really nowhere to send us to school. So my mother taught all of us, preschool through high school. All of us graduated from her homeschool program. And my parents really emphasized education. So even though we worked on the ranch a lot, they really emphasized our ability to learn, really told us to focus on that, and all of us attended college because of that. This is a more modern photo of all of us, and there are 13 college degrees represented in this photo now. Evidently, we learned to love to read and to love to learn a lot. This is the ranch that I grew up on, Pine Creek Ranch, which was originally marked out by Old Jules, like I mentioned, and it is a 10,000-acre ranch. It would support 300 pairs, cows and calves, year-round. And it was a cow-calf operation that sold their calves at weaning. So there's several different ways that ranches operate, and one of them is to just sell their calves at weaning time, which is the ranch I was raised on. This was a beautiful place. It was very unique in the Sandhills because it has a permanent, year-round running stream, or creek, I guess, depending on what you'd like to call it. I grew up in the house on the right. The upstairs had no heat. It had no air conditioning. There was one bathroom for 9 people, so praise the Lord we did have a bathroom. And this is why we had a running creek permanently across our ranch, because these Ogallala Aquifer springs, some of them produce at 100 gallons a minute. And this is just one of the many that is on our ranch, and it would feed the creek year-round. And because it is a desert, it has really harsh winters as well. There's no trees. There is nothing native to stop the wind, and the wind can be 40 to 60 miles per hour, not uncommonly. So ranching in that weather is really unique because you can have a lot of snow. You can have feet of snow. It can be very cold. But it is an excellent place for raising cattle. That's a picture of me when I was 15. We did all of the haying on the ranch, we 7 children, and we did all of our haying every year to feed 300 cows. So we were blessed to have enough hay ground to support our cattle. We used 1930s to 1940s International tractors. I'm sure I could still hop on one today. I have no interest in doing that. We used bar mowers, and something that's unique about the way I grew up is that we stacked hay instead of baling. Most people have never done that. So for my whole life until I went to college, this is what I did every summer. My grandfather built that stacker, and it's called a slide stacker. My main job was to drive this rake tractor, and it has these very wide tires on the front and the back because all of our meadows were on what is called floating sod. So that means that the sod is only 1 foot to 3 feet deep on top of the water. And you drive your tractor across it, it bubbles like jello around you, but it still produces good hay as long as you don't break through the sod. We would rake the hay into windrows, and then the sweep would sweep up the hay, take it over to the stacker, and then another tractor would pull the slide up, dump the hay over, and then someone would have to go jump in the hay to compact it and then level it out so that your stack wouldn't fall over when you were done making your stack. This is a view of our meadow. We put up about 100 stacks of hay a year. And you can see all of the different ditching and all the different springs that we had in order to make hay ground out of the bottom of a marsh. To feed the hay stacks, we had a flatbed trailer that had chains on it, and you'd back underneath the stack, draw the whole stack up onto the flatbed, and then have several children ideally with drag forks. So that's a pitchfork that's been bent into 90 degrees, and then people walk along the side, stab the drag fork into the haystack, and drag off chunks of hay. That's a very old-fashioned process, but it worked well for us. So growing up on our ranch, we were homeschooled every morning of the school year. We had a regular school year like everyone else, and then we were free to work in the afternoons. So all of our work was horseback. We didn't have four-wheelers or anything, so I grew up horseback and stayed that way until I left for college when I was 17. So this is my sister Natalie and I on Snip, who is an excellent horse. This is me on Tequila. We kind of just kept our horses in the yard and rode them around for fun and then hopped on them for work when we needed to. And when I was 14 years old, I saved up enough money to buy blue chili bars, which greatly improved my perceived standing in my community because I owned my own horse. But Chili was green, much more green than she was broke, and she broke me considerably. Many concussions, she broke my back, she often stranded me in the pasture. So we had a working relationship for 4 years. I survived it, she survived it. Good for us. She still works for my sister today, and I still love blue roans. They are probably my passion. If I ever see a blue roan, that is my favorite horse. So now begins the actual art presentation, if you will. I was homeschooled, so we had no art education. My mother was excellent at teaching chemistry, Latin, English, math, but she would admit that she was no art teacher, and so she did not. And most of her children had no inclination for art, but she did value education, and she bought me as many books as she could get a hold of about horses and art. So these next 4 slides show you the main inspirations of my art career, which at the time, I had no aspirations of being an artist. I didn't know that anyone ever was an artist. I just thought people drew pictures sometimes, or painted sometimes. C.W. Anderson and this book, containing 50 illustrations, was highly influential to me because I just copied them. I would just sketch them out exactly as he had them and try and make them look like he did. Will James and his Smokey the Cow Horse was also very influential. All of Marguerite Henry's books, she had sketches and photos in there that showed me how people drew pictures of horses. And one of my sisters, Carrie, gave me an actual drawing pencil and this book, How to Draw Horses. And this had the 3-circle method. Draw 3 circles, connect them, and you have a horse. And I would say that this is how I learned to draw horses. I went through this book so many times I couldn't tell you. This is what taught me how to draw. And I never did use up that whole pencil because it was the only actual drawing pencil I had, and so I wanted to take good care of it, so I never actually used it. Sorry, that one is a little bit overexposed. This slide is probably a little bit clearer. This is my work from 2003 on a little piece of scrap paper, but it was probably the best piece I had ever done so far. I would have been 12 years old, I think. 10 years old. Sorry, you were correct. But I really liked the anatomy of this horse so much. I liked this drawing so much I still have it, obviously. It hung on my wall for a really long time. I just loved the horse's, all right, there we go. I loved his nose and his ears. And by 2005, I was starting to add some values to my pieces, some more detail, some better perspective. So this one is a little bit interesting because I used to carry a small notebook in my pocket while I was out working. And if I had a few minutes while I was watching a gate or I was left in a pickup, I would just sketch with a little scrap of paper, or a little scrap of pencil that I had. And you can see in this upper right corner, sorry, my little laser isn't working, I guess, is the original sketch I did, I guess, out in the pasture of a little wild horse running. And so I came home and took some school paper, evidently there's some multiplication on there, and did a couple more sketches of this little horse, developing it a little bit more, I guess, and I saved it. This is an example of me copying out of Marguerite Henry's book. I think that's a Frederick Remington sketch in the book. But I loved the body language of this horse on both sides and the line of the man holding the horse's neck here. It's just so impactful, and so I copied it. And I was really proud of my rendition at the time. I think I would have been 13 then. One of the other ways I really developed my skills was just sitting out in the pasture with the horses and just sketching their legs repeatedly as they just walked around me. So I have pages and pages of these little leg sketches of these horses that I knew and loved. By 2007, I was getting a little bit better. This is straight out of C.W. Anderson's book, and I was just really happy with the detail I got in this piece and the line. A lot more detail and a lot more shadows and values and depth in this piece. And then I was also drawing neighbors and people that I saw in our community. And this is quite a big jump because it has a lot better perspective and a lot better detail in this piece. By 2008, again, there's kind of a large jump in the work that I'm doing. This is a considerably bigger drawing of a horse here. And you can see the veins, and you can see a lot more use of light. And actually, this is one of the first pieces where you can see I give up the use of line in determining where the edge of an object is. So at some point in my life, I realized that light didn't have lines. So when there's an edge of an object that was bright, it would just disappear. It was value that determined the edge of an object and not line. Another beautiful piece showing the musculature of a horse and the details. I loved his body language in this sketch. So when I was 17, I left for college. I guess Chili and I were getting along this day because we got a good picture together. I hadn't been drawing a great deal. I mean, I've showed you selections, but I really did not draw as much as you might think. Certainly not even as much as somebody who attended an art class where they would make you do several drawings a day. That's not what I was doing. But I did love what I was doing, and I was always trying to portray a horse just a little bit more realistically. And as you can tell, I pretty much only worked on horses. So this is the first year I started college. I did this piece, and this is just a little sketch, but it's the first time I found charcoal. Somebody gave me a charcoal pencil, and I don't think I ever went back. I just love the life that is in charcoal. I love the deep blacks, I love the bright whites, I love the texture of it, I love that it's soft, and I think that there's just an infinite possibility of what can be achieved with charcoal. But for this piece, you can see a lot more detail. It's one of my first portraits, and I'm really working on the detail in this woman's face and the reflection of the metal. It's kind of a big jump from the last piece that you saw that was a year earlier. So while I was in college, I did only about one drawing a year for the 4 years that I was there, and I did it as as a gift for my husband. So he was playing the Halo video game, I guess. So this is Master Chief from that video game. And this piece shows a lot of, a big change again, because the values in here are more broad. There are more values. It's not just black and white. There's all the grays. All the details and the texture of the metal. And I was just kind of blown away when I finished this piece. It was like the first time I'd really touched realism, almost photographic realism. And so I really pursued that. But for the 4 years that I was in college, I was really not thinking about art at all, because I had tried to go to college for graphic design. But not knowing any better, I guess I said something in my interview with the advisor that made the advisor say, well, you should actually go study software engineering instead. So being completely ignorant of either thing, I said, okay. And I just went to the School of Science and Technology. And that was quite a task, because I was really not prepared for that. A lot of the other students had been programming computers for years. They had been taking high-level math for years. They knew what they were getting into, and I did not. In fact, it was my first in-classroom experience, because I had been homeschooled until then. So my very first project was to build a small software application. And I drew from my experience, and I built an application focused on managing commercial cattle ranches. So it was like Facebook for cows, if you will. Every cow has a profile, and every time you interact with a cow, all of the details are recorded. So for a cow's lifetime, every time she has a calf, every time she gets a vaccination, every time you see the cow, it is recorded and added to this system. Her weight, her calves' weights, her calves' harvest data. And I built this early on in my college career. I was 18 at the time, so it was my second year of college. And the final project for this class was to present your project to a group of real venture capitalists for a letter grade. But they were so impressed that they actually asked to invest in my company. Well, it sounds like a good thing. At the time, it felt like a lot of money and a really unique opportunity. But they wanted to buy 20% of my non-existent company, and they wanted me to quit school immediately to work on it full-time and get it to market. So as an 18-year-old, I struggled with that considerably, if I should do that or not. It sounded like a lot of money, but eventually I declined. They thought that the market would change so rapidly in ranching that by the time I got out of school, it would not be relevant anymore. But they were venture capitalists, and they were not in ag, so they didn't realize that 3 years is not that long in ranching. So I thought that the opportunity would wait for me, and I finished my college degree. Here is a photo of me demonstrating my program while I'm out on our ranch. Our cows have electronic ID tags, so you can scan them with a wand and then pull them up in your records. So in 2015, I guess 2015 is the year I graduated college. This is another drawing that I did, again kind of pursuing this realism of textures and values. So I was really proud of what I was able to achieve in the metal here, and that you could kind of feel like it was reflecting the light accurately. And this would be the last piece I did before I left college. So like I said, I really only did about 4 or 5 drawings for the whole 4 years that I was in college. And every time I did one, I was just better than I was the last time, even though I hadn't done anything in the meantime. Which was nice, but it was, I mean, the only thing I can really attribute that to is just a God-given gift, because there's really nothing to explain it other than that. I can't even claim the hard work. I think it's a God-given gift. I finished my 4-year degree at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and I did very well. I actually won 9 major awards while I was there, including an official congratulations from the legislature of Nebraska for the work that I achieved in ag software. I graduated top of my class, spoke at international competitions, and won the Dean's Award. It was a great success for me, and I grew to really love developing software. I love databases, I love statistics, and it was a great fit. I think I've just always been able to be passionate about whatever my hands were working on at the time. And I think that that's biblical. I think that God commanded us to do whatever we do well. And so I did software well. In 2016, I married my high school sweetheart of 9 years and moved out to his family ranch, the JHL Ranch, which is 4 times larger than the ranch that I grew up on. We have 1,200 cow-calf pairs, and it is a cow-calf operation like the one I grew up on, meaning we raise cows with the intention of them having calves, and then we sell the calves. But the main difference on our ranch is that we keep the calves, we own them until they're harvested at the packing plant. So we use that data from the packing plant in my system that I built in college to determine better ways to breed our cattle. This would be the first drawing I did after we were married. This is a drawing of my horse, Blue Chili Bars. So you can kind of see the tension, I guess, I was trying to portray here that we had between each other. I loved my horse. I don't know if she loved me, but we had a good working relationship. Anyway, you can kind of see the defiance in both of our eyes. We're both kind of staring at each other and choosing how the day will go, I guess. This is white charcoal on black paper. So this is the first time I tried this. And it is the first time I got to use my butterfly signature. I don't know if you've noticed that. It's a backwards R, forwards B. And I came up with it when I was 13. So I fell in love with Ethan when I was 13. I wouldn't recommend that. But I have never not been in love with him. So we got married when I was 22, I think. And then I was finally able to use the signature that I had come up with. So this is me working on the JHL Ranch. For those several years after we got married, I was a remote software engineer, and I worked on the ranch. I was a ranch wife. That was how my life was going. I was still doing sketches. I still loved drawing, but I still had never really heard of an artist being a profession. And I had never really seen any fine art. I had never traveled anywhere that I'd gotten to go to a gallery or anything. But in 2019, things started to pick up a little bit. I bought myself some acrylic paint and decided I would give a go at that, and sat down and painted this. And I really liked it. I don't know if it's a good painting or not, but I liked it. And then Hedda was born. So she's my first child. She's 5 now. And she was a difficult delivery. There was a surgery. I was bedridden for several months. And so that was a difficult year. Kind of 2019 was absorbed in recovery from that. And that came to 2020, where there was just kind of this sudden change in my life. And like I said, my art just sometimes when I had stopped doing it for months or even a year at a time, the next time I did a piece, it was just so much better than it should have been. And that's the case with this piece. Let Days Speak is probably the first piece I would say that is a piece. I mean, it was the first thing that really was of maybe even professional quality, and it kind of just came out of nowhere. I really wanted to portray this woman with all of the detail and the honor and the grace that she had, and I wanted the light to be evident on her wrinkles, and I spent a great deal of time on this piece and in her hair. And when I was done, I was kind of shocked, actually. I really didn't even know where it had come from. I had never done anything like it before. And a local librarian saw it, and she said, "You're actually really good at drawing. You should send this somewhere." Where would you send a piece of art? Where would you send a drawing? So I started Googling, and there was a local little place about an hour away that they had some show coming up, and so I called and asked if they would let me send in a drawing, and they said sure. So this was probably about the next drawing I did in 2021. So I had done a small local show before this, and I did this piece and submitted it to the next thing that came up on Google, which was the American Plains Artist Show in Cheyenne. And I sent this piece, and it's a drawing of my sister. Some of you may have met her 3 years ago. She was here. She's the only other one of my siblings who is still in ranching today. And again, like the last drawing, I wanted to portray my sister with all of the glory and grace that I felt she deserved. I don't know if there's anybody else that I respect more than my sister Heidi. And she lives the life that I admire. She's a ranch woman with 5 kids, and she homeschools, and just the salt of the earth. And so this piece is probably born more out of love than it is out of technical skill, but I wanted to show you her eyes and how beautiful she is. And when I finished this, I realized that she looks very nearly exactly like my great-great-grandmother. And so her photo is down there below the drawing of my sister. This piece won 2nd place at the American Plains Artist Show. And I was kind of blown away by that because that seemed like a big show. That was pretty cool. And then, this would have been in 2021. So a local artist named David Dorsey, who has shown here several times over the years, many times maybe, mentioned the Mountain Oyster Club show when I was asking about where one should submit artwork. And I thought that sounded kind of like a scam, if I'm going to be honest. Well, I know what mountain oysters are, and I didn't know why anyone would name an art show after that. So I looked it up, and you had to pay to submit a piece, and so I thought that sounded a little scammy too, because I'd never had to do that before. But I submitted it, and then I was told that I was accepted to the show. And so then I had to frame this piece, which I didn't know how to do. And then I had to ship it. So I bought an art shipping box, and I put this large piece that was behind a piece of cheap single-strength glass in this giant box. And I prayed over it. I said, I don't know how this will get down there, but dear Lord, please get it to wherever it's going safely. Put it on the 4-wheeler, drove it down to the UPS guy, and then went to work cows that day. And then worried about it for like 2 whole weeks. But this was in the middle of COVID, and that didn't really affect us on the ranch greatly, except that in October of 2021, everyone on the ranch got COVID. Oh. So we were all pretty sick, and we still have to work cows. You don't get to stop working cows because you don't feel well, even if all of you don't feel well at the same time. So we had fevers, and we had the body aches, and all the problems that came with COVID. And it was really cold, it was really windy. We were all like leaning on each other just to get through the day and manage to stay standing. And in the middle of that, I found out that I had a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. So I was doubly sick. And I had to take myself to our closest hospital, 2.5 hours away, because they wouldn't let anybody come with me because we all had COVID, of course. So then I had surgery, and that was only 2 weeks before the Mountain Oyster Club show. And I just didn't know what to do. It was such a struggle because it was a unique opportunity, but was it worth spending the money to come down? I wasn't feeling well. Everyone on the ranch was, still recovering. And it just seemed like an impractical life choice to pursue something like art in the face of a real problem, if you will, like a ranch problem. That's a real problem. And while I was dwelling on that, I felt God tell me, why are you looking at the waves? So that's in reference to the story in the Bible of Peter jumping out of the boat to go see Jesus. That was a very impractical choice. It doesn't make any sense to jump out of the boat. But I think at times God calls us into impractical things because he has a plan in it greater than what we can see in the moment, and definitely that was the case. So I took God's words and I came down here. And I had no idea what I was in for. I didn't know what a fine art show was like. I had not seen fine art. So when I walked through the door and saw all of this tremendous art, some of the best art in the world, and I saw my piece on the far wall, and I thought, ooh, the far wall must be a good thing because you can see it when you come in the door. And there was a ribbon on it. And I didn't even know there were awards at this show. Oh. And Alicia met me at the door and said, I'm so happy to meet you. You just won Best of Show. And I didn't even know. I didn't really even know the significance of that, but I was speechless because I thought, well, that must be the top award then for all of these pieces. And and I've never seen anything like this. And Mark Sahlberg was here, and he was very congratulatory, but he said, clearly this is framed terribly. I was like, well, tell me what I should do then. And he said, you need to call this guy, call Dave Owen. And I said, okay, I will call this guy if I have any more demand for my artwork. And I have to say, Dave, wherever you're sitting in here, that I, as a child, would go down the aisle at Walmart, and I'd look at those frames in the frame department at Walmart, and thought how amazing it would be to put a piece of my art in one of those frames. Because any frame would make my art look better. But I couldn't imagine that anybody would have enough money to buy a frame for every piece of art that they made. That seemed like a crazy idea. So thank you for making my artwork look so much better, even than it is. And so many of the artists here. I think Dave is one of the great artists in the room, possibly. And that kind of started off a whirlwind of 4 years of suddenly becoming an artist who had work in demand. And Settlers West asked me to be a part of their miniature show the next spring. And I went home, and I had never had to produce a piece of art really on a deadline, and so I did these 2 little pieces and submitted them to that show. This was a large piece that I did for their summer show that same year, and it was a completely new level of detail, almost excruciating detail. It was really hard to wrap my mind around drawing this just, from scratch, but I just loved the idea of it so much, and my head hurt at the end of every day. I mean, it was just so much to wrap my mind around. And now, looking back, I think it's kind of like learning to run a marathon or do any difficult sport. You kind of just have to build up the muscles for it. And that's what I was doing with this piece. And it was very difficult, but I really liked the outcome of it. In 2022, I did the first of my saddle series that I'll show you. And each one of these saddles is an incredibly significant piece to me. So kind of like that drawing of my sister, I think I'm trying to draw a soul onto a piece of paper, and that's a really ambitious sounding statement, but this is a family saddle. So my grandfather bought it used. It was produced and made about 100 miles from where I live. My dad used it his whole life. My sister used it. She still uses it now. And I grew up thinking that this was just the most beautiful saddle I had ever seen, and it's probably not, but it was very significant to me. And my sister uses it for fencing, so she has a pair of fencing pliers on it, she has a bag of staples, and it's just a very practical tool that is an example of 100 years worth of ranching, and it's still in use today. So I like to draw these really pieces that honor saddles, if you will, and the lives that they represent. That piece actually ended up winning Best of Show at the Museum of Western Art and then was added to their permanent collection. So that year Leaf was born. He's 2 now and sitting up here. In 2023, I started a new kind of drawing, if you will, where I draw with charcoal on encaustic board. So it's a rough surface, kind of like sandpaper, but it holds charcoal very well. And I use brushes extensively with my charcoal, and it allows me to achieve these really, really deep blacks and these really bright whites and these really fine details. And it really kind of crosses the threshold of photorealism. Now, that's not always my end goal, but in the case of being able to produce it, these panels allow me to do that. And since I've started working on these panels, I have not gone back to paper. I haven't done a piece on paper since. This was a piece I did last year, and it features my brother-in-law, and it's kind of in the style of James Bama, now that I know who that is. Kind of honoring the grit and the work of a man caught in the middle of his activity. So this is my brother-in-law, and it's kind of a mystical piece almost, because it features a man in the middle of his work, but then you can kind of see what the focus of his life is, kind of fading behind him, the cows and the trees. And it's this nice white on white values, which I love the idea of using black charcoal pencils to depict white on white. And I have a whole bunch of pieces planned for that because I think it's just a really interesting idea. This was another drawing I did of my sister. Maybe I'll do one of her every year for her whole life. That would be interesting. She's a very good model for me, very willing. And again, I just love her eyes, and I love her intensity, and I love who she is as a person, and I think that that comes across in these pieces. So I'd like to talk about the three pieces, I guess, I have here. This one is titled Home from the Line, and it features spurs and shaps and a bit from somebody who rode the line for a big ranch. So ranches didn't always have fences. Sometimes they still don't have fences. So they had men who would ride the line, which was the ranch border, watching for cattle, watching for predators, rustlers. And then when he would get back from the line, usually in the winter, he would go to the bunkhouse. And so this is just like a moment in time where he's taken his shaps and his spurs off, and he put his bit inside the bunkhouse so that it would be warm for his horse in the morning, because no horse likes a cold bit. And this is just a still life image of that situation. The Way of the River is a beautiful piece. Some pieces have really punchy stories. Other pieces are beautiful in their simplicity, and this is one of those, I think. I wanted to show a horse that's kind of timeless. So this could have happened 1,000 years ago. This could happen today. It's just a moment that you came upon that is just a beautiful horse. And again, I like to depict white using charcoal. I think it's an interesting idea. Some of the pieces, some pieces are simple, and others are complex and have deep stories and histories. And so that's kind of the basis of my saddle series. I've done 6 of these saddles, and there's one here, and these 3 have sold this year, but each one of these is a family saddle or somebody local. So these are saddles that I have in my studio. I know all of their stories. I know the people who have ridden them. I know where they were made. A lot of the guns that are in these are family guns or our neighbors' guns. They've owned their whole lives. Every bit of it is my story, and it's from my area. And they're like classic portraiture, except for saddles. This is the piece that is here. It's titled The Spade, because this piece tells the story of the Great Spade Ranch, which some of you may have heard of. But it was started in Nebraska. All right, no pointer, I guess. There it is. Kind of where I live. In fact, it's a bordering neighbor to our ranch, the JHL Ranch. But it was started in 1888, and at that time, most of that area was government land, so it was run over the course of 500,000 acres. It was a huge ranch. They ran 60,000 cows. It was started by a man named Bartlett Richards, who came from Vermont. In 1888 is when he started the ranch. But by 1904, the Kincaid Act made ranchers take down their fences. So the ranch became a lot smaller, and now is on around 30,000 acres, and it still borders me. But it was owned by a man named Lance Bixby. And his sister, Nellie Bixby, in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, was actually a classical guitar player in Seattle for an orchestra. She made her way to Montana. She bought this saddle in 1910. She was a school teacher in Montana at the time. And she rode this saddle down to the Spade Ranch, which is right next to where I live. It's over 800 miles. And she came by herself. And I have her journal page that details this whole trip. She had her classical guitar on one side of her saddle, and she had her rifle scabbard on the other side of her saddle. But she said she felt so bad for her horse Diamond that she walked most of the way. So she didn't actually ride the saddle very much of the way down from Montana, and it took her a long time to get home, but she felt bad for her horse. So this is her saddle from 1910, and this is the original Spade branding iron that they used. It contains some spurs that were handmade by a Spade cowboy. That's a stool that was on the Spade Ranch for 150 years. And it also shows a glass jug wrapped in burlap. And so they would soak those glass jugs in water, and that was the only way to keep cool water all day long. The evaporation from the jug would allow you to have cool water. This is the most recent saddle that I did this year. This is for the March in Montana auction coming up this year. I'm excited to see what that will turn into. But this piece shows the saddle that was owned by my husband's grandfather. So each one of these is really significant to us as a family. You know, that it's my boots, it's my gun. And I think it's an interesting story of where the West was and where it still is, that it's a very living lifestyle. And it really hasn't changed that much because everything that I'm depicting was used 100 years ago and it's used today. These are, to wrap up, these are two of my last major pieces that I did, kind of showing my style as it is now. The one on the left, again, is a beautiful composition. I mean, there's a story there, but really the point is the beauty of a man on a horse, kind of the end of the work at the end of a day. And then the piece on the right is a little bit of a break for me because it's in color. And a lot of artists over the last 3 or 4 years have said, well, when you start working in color, then you'll be a real artist. And they're mostly joking. I'm not sure all of them are joking. I understand it. But I do really love charcoal. So I did this piece in charcoal, and then I went over it with a gouache wash and kind of turned it into a colorized photograph style, I guess. But the model is me because it's kind of awkward to ask someone to take a picture of your butt, and it's awkward to take a picture of someone else's butt, so I took a picture of my own butt. And the storyline of this piece is like an Old West situation of 30 paces. So she's walked away from you, you've walked away from her, she's about to turn around and draw on you. That's kind of the storyline of this piece. It's been a crazy 3 years. I've had a lot of good advertising, a lot of major awards around the shows that I have been in. And then it was very amusing to be featured in Vanity Fair this summer. I'm not quite sure why they contacted me, but I was in their magazine for 3 months. And then Southwest Art Magazine selected me for their 21 artists under the age of 31, which was a tremendous honor. Glenn Dean, for example, was selected 10 years ago, so that's pretty cool. On our ranch, we were able to build a new studio this year, and so that's made a huge difference because I was previously just working in a little bedroom and it was pretty difficult to do large pieces in there. But now I have a formal studio, which allows me to do bigger pieces, to package my art, frame my art, and the kids are in there all day, every day, and I have a nice view of the corrals and much better light. So that has been a huge blessing. Some of my upcoming shows are at Settlers West, the Legacy Gallery. I'm pretty excited about the Masters of Drawing at the Medicine Man Gallery here in town. That will be in March. And then the March in Montana will be very exciting as well. I haven't had a piece at live auction yet, obviously, only having done this for a few years. So I wanted to thank you all for listening to me, and thank you for having me.
For you and maybe some others.
Yes, I will be glad to answer questions.
You know, because of the kind of unique education that you've had, what do you have in mind for your children?
Well, I think my parents emphasized education and then doing whatever you wanted. So every one of my siblings pursued a completely different career, everywhere from the military to medical to agriculture to finance. Just whatever your passion is. So both of my kids are currently homeschooled, just again due to how rurally we live. There will probably be more art education for them than there was for me. But I don't, if they have a bent towards something else, I would be glad for them to pursue it. Hedda at the moment wants to be an obstetrician, and Leaf likes motorcycles. So whatever they are into, I will support.
Question over there?
Yep.
Could you stand up, please?
Do you work every day, and how long would it take to complete a...
Yeah, I have a pretty rigorous schedule to get everything in my life done. So I get up at 4 or 5 every morning. I have things I like to study. I'm an avid runner. I like to play the harp. I'm learning to play the harp, I should say. And then I work for 3 hours in the morning on drawing and 3 hours in the afternoon. So everything else kind of flows around that, and I do all the cooking. So I kind of stop at 4 in the afternoon, and I work 6 days a week. So that's the schedule that I keep to get these pieces done, and they range everywhere from 40 to 60, 80 hours to do. Just depends on how complex they are.
Any other questions? Right over there.
Comment. Please ignore anyone who tells you you must add color.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions? Rachel, your story's beautiful, your family's beautiful, and you're part of our family, and we love you.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you here and see the rest of you as
Yep.
well. Oh, this was really special. Your stories are just incredible.
Thank you.